February 23, 1964, Daytona International Speedway. The air buzzed with anticipation. 4 Plymouth Belvederes stood ready at the starting line, each hiding something explosive beneath its hood, something that would forever change the world of American racing. By the end of the race, these cars didn't just win the Daytona 500, they crushed it, finishing first, second, third, and fourth, leaving the rest of the field in utter disbelief. Behind their unbelievable performance was one engine, an engineering monster that would shake NASCAR to its core, the 426 Hemi, an engine so powerful, so dominant, NASCAR would be forced to ban it just 1 year later. To truly grasp the magnitude of what the 426 Hemi accomplished, we need to rewind to the early 1960s. Chrysler, at the time, was getting smoked on the racetrack. Ford had their 427 side oiler, and Chevy was racking up wins with their 409 and later their 427 big blocks. Chrysler's answer? The 426 Max Wedge. It was fast, but not fast enough. Even with over 400 horsepower, it couldn't hold a candle to what Ford and Chevy were doing. Chrysler needed a revolution, not a tune-up. So they turned back to an old idea, one they had shelved for practicality: the hemispherical combustion chamber. In the 1950s, this design made Chrysler famous for their firepower V8s. The Hemi head allowed for larger valves, better breathing, and cleaner combustion. But by 1958, Chrysler had abandoned the Hemi for wedge head designs, which were easier and cheaper to produce. That might have worked for street cars, but on the track, cheaper wasn't cutting it. Desperate to win again, Chrysler made a bold move. In 1963, they resurrected the Hemi, but not the old version. This was a new beast, the 426 Race Hemi, built only for one purpose: domination. And domination it delivered. The new Hemis weren't off-the-shelf engines. These were handcrafted, race-ready power plants assembled under secrecy in Chrysler's engine lab just 2 months before Daytona. Everything about this motor was purpose-built, from the 426 cubic inch displacement, which perfectly matched NASCAR's limit, to the massive 2.25-inch intake and 1.94-inch exhaust valves. It breathed like no engine before it. The camshafts were radical. Huge lift, massive duration. These things wouldn't idle politely. They snarled, lopey, and mean, hungry for high RPMs. On the dyno, these motors whispered numbers no one wanted to believe. Some rumored to touch 600, even 700 horsepower. Remember, this was the early 1960s. That kind of power was nearly unthinkable. Then came Daytona. Chrysler rolled up with not 1, not 2, but 4 Hemi-powered Plymouths. Behind the wheels, names that would go down in racing history: Richard Petty, Jimmy Pardue, Paul Goldsmith, Bobby Isaac. And from the moment qualifying started, it was clear something new was in town and it wasn't playing fair. Paul Goldsmith took pole position. During the race, Petty stormed into the lead and never looked back. The final result? A jaw-dropping 1-2-3-4 finish. Petty won by more than 2.5 minutes. In NASCAR, that's not a win. That's a blowout of historic proportions. But the story didn't end at Daytona. The entire 1964 season became the year of the Hemi. Petty alone grabbed 9 wins. Other drivers followed. The Hemi didn't just win, it warped the game. Teams realized if you didn't have a Hemi, you weren't racing, you were just surviving. So why was the Hemi so unbeatable? It all came down to the design. Unlike wedge head engines, the hemispherical chamber allowed the intake and exhaust valves to be placed opposite each other, increasing their size and improving airflow. This meant better breathing at high RPMs and more efficient combustion. The valve sizes alone were enormous for their time, far beyond what competitors were running. But that wasn't all. The port design was fine-tuned for velocity and flow. The intake ports swirled the air-fuel mixture perfectly. The exhaust ports efficiently evacuated combustion gases. The hemispherical chamber shape also created an ideal environment for complete fuel burn, turning more of the air-fuel mix into usable power and less into wasted heat. These engines ran high compression ratios, 12-to-1 or more, requiring race-grade fuel and expert tuning. Their camshafts were pure aggression, holding valves open longer to cram every possible molecule of air and fuel into the cylinders. The bottom end was overbuilt. Forged steel rods, balanced cranks, performance pistons. Even the oiling and cooling systems were upgraded to handle the heat and stress. While Chrysler was dominating, Ford wasn't sleeping. They fired back with the now legendary 427 SOHC camera, an overhead cam engine designed to outgun the Hemi with even more advanced tech. It had aluminum heads, a single overhead cam per bank, and massive RPM potential. On paper, it might have had the edge, but it arrived too late and faced its own issues. By then, NASCAR had seen enough. The 426 race Hemi was just too good. In 1965, they made a controversial decision: ban the engine unless Chrysler could sell it to the public in street cars. Chrysler responded with the now iconic Street Hemi in 1966, but the damage was done. The Hemi had already changed the game forever. The 426 Hemi wasn't just an engine. It was a statement. A piece of engineering so bold, so ahead of its time, it forced the entire motorsports world to take notice. It didn't just win races, it forced rule changes. It wasn't just fast, it was history-making. And to this day, when gearheads hear the word Hemi, they know exactly what it means. Power, legacy, dominance.
As the 1965 NASCAR season approached, something big was brewing behind the scenes. Ford had been quietly preparing a weapon of their own, a high-revving, cutting-edge engine that promised to rival the brutal force of Chrysler's 426 Hemi. Meanwhile, General Motors was also refining their big block architecture, building off the promise shown by their elusive 427 mystery motor. They didn't just have power, they had aerodynamic muscle with platforms like the Chevrolet Chevelle and later the Laguna, giving them an edge on the speedways. But underneath all that competition, NASCAR faced a growing crisis. The Hemi wasn't just fast, it was too fast. Its overwhelming dominance the previous year sent shockwaves through the racing world. What was supposed to be a sport driven by driver skill and team strategy was turning into a technology arms race. And at the heart of it all was one question: could any team without a Hemi even dream of winning? The uproar began the moment the checkered flag waved at Daytona in 1964. Ford, in particular, raised their voice. They accused Chrysler of creating a race engine with no real-world counterpart, an exotic piece of machinery built only to dominate the track, not the street. And they had a point. Chrysler's Hemis weren't regular production motors. They were hand-assembled beasts unsuitable for the average buyer and virtually undrivable in day-to-day conditions. Chevrolet backed them up, arguing that Chrysler had an advantage that wasn't just about horsepower, it was a fundamentally superior design. The hemispherical combustion chambers allowed for massive airflow and perfect flame travel, a recipe no wedge-head engine could realistically match no matter how much RNT was thrown at it. Caught in the crossfire of a manufacturer standoff, NASCAR leadership was in a bind. On one hand, they wanted to encourage technological progress. Racing had always been about pushing boundaries. But on the other hand, they were expected to keep things competitive. If fans could predict the winner solely based on what was under the hood, where was the excitement? By the end of 1964, pressure was mounting. Sponsors, networks, and fans began to express concerns. Ford threatened to walk away. General Motors grumbled as well. And so, NASCAR made a drastic move. Rather than tweak the rules, they dropped the hammer. They banned the Hemi for the 1965 season. The reasoning? Homologation. NASCAR's rules stated that in order to compete, an engine had to be offered to the general public in a production car. And Chrysler's 426 race Hemi wasn't. It was a prototype in every sense. Ford argued that point hard, and NASCAR listened. The verdict was clear. If Chrysler wanted to race it, they'd have to sell it. But that was easier said than done. The race Hemi was never meant to idle at stoplights or survive traffic jams. With sky-high compression ratios, brutal camshaft profiles, and a thirst for race fuel, it was the stuff of pit lane fantasy, not suburban commutes. Making it street legal meant gutting its raw edge, and Chrysler knew it. Faced with a brutal choice, redesign the Hemi for the street or walk away, Chrysler made the only decision they could. They pulled the plug. Chrysler officially withdrew from NASCAR in protest, and with them went their crown jewel, Richard Petty, the face of Mopar. The man who had turned the Hemi into a legend suddenly had no place to race. The backlash was immediate. Fans were furious. Sponsors were shaken. NASCAR's golden boy was out, and all because an engine was too good. Meanwhile, Ford found themselves tangled in the same mess. Their 427 SOHC Cammer, which was supposed to counter the Hemi, also failed the homologation test. If you wanted to race it, you had to sell it. And Ford's monster motor wasn't fit for public consumption either. Just like that, both powerhouses were out of the game. The 1965 season became a strange one, dominated by General Motors by default. But winning because your rivals were benched wasn't the kind of glory anyone wanted. It felt hollow. But Chrysler wasn't done yet. Behind closed doors, their engineers began work on something new, a tamer, more streetable version of the Hemi that could still carry the spirit of the race motor. The result? The legendary Street Hemi. Lowered compression, gentler cam profiles, and a more manageable cooling system made it possible to drop this beast into production cars. It first appeared in 1966 under the hoods of the Dodge Coronet and Plymouth Belvedere, and it was an instant icon. Rated conservatively at 425 horsepower, real-world dyno tests showed the Hemi often producing closer to 450 or 475. It was raw, it was beautiful, and most importantly, it was street legal. NASCAR had no choice. They reinstated the Hemi for the 1966 season. Chrysler returned to the track with a vengeance. Richard Petty came roaring back, his name once again etched into the victory columns. Thanks to the Street Hemi, he would go on to become the winningest driver in NASCAR history. But NASCAR, ever wary of another Hemi-dominated era, began to fight back again, this time with rules. They implemented restrictor plates, added weight penalties, and introduced new limits on engine size and performance. By 1971, those rule changes had done what the 1965 ban couldn't. They made the Hemi obsolete on the track. Still, the engine's legacy was already cemented. The Street Hemi didn't just define an era, it became the symbol of it. From Dodge Chargers and Super Bees to the legendary Plymouth Cuda and Roadrunner, the Hemi was the heartbeat of American muscle. Its throaty roar, monstrous torque, and unforgettable performance made it the holy grail of classic car collectors. Today, original Hemi cars fetch astronomical prices. A 1970 Hemi Cuda convertible, easily over $1 million. The engine that was once banned from NASCAR for being too powerful has become a legend. The icon of performance, rebellion, and raw American horsepower. In the end, the story of the 426 Hemi is one of innovation, dominance, and unintended consequences. Chrysler didn't just build an engine, they built a monster that changed racing forever. They were punished for their brilliance, yet immortalized for the very same reason. And maybe, just maybe, that's the greatest compliment an engine can receive.